G'day, just doing a rebuild on a 5R55S transmission, and we'll just do a strip down and analysis. With the pan off, you can see it's got a lot of fine metal in there. You can see that, a lot of fuzz on the magnet. Whiz off the extension housing, 10mm. And you'll see here a little parking pole. Now at this point, it's a good idea, before you pull the main part out of it, is to take a measurement of the end float. We do that by pushing the output shaft in and out with the input shaft, and you'll get an indication of if any thrust washers or bearings or anything have let go there. Also, another thing you need to keep in mind, to get the center support out, there's a little bolt in here as well. Take the input shaft out. You'll notice there's a shorter spline bit and a longer spline bit. The shorter bit goes in. You can't put it in there anyway, it won't go in. Splines won't match, so you can't muck that one up, but just make sure it locates in properly like that. Got our puller, and you want to put it on that spot there where you're not going to do any damage. And we'll grab our slide hammer. You've got to pull it out evenly or it gets cocked and stuck in that bore. And you've got a gasket there and an O-ring that, and I can hear the sounds slightly different, so it's actually coming now. And there we go. Now we can pull the pump out. Now I've got this little frame there on our sink there, and what I can do is drop a couple of screwdrivers through there, like so, and that'll help me support that while I loosen those bolts on the pump. There we go, there's a pump. So you've got your drive gear, and you've got your driven gear on the outside. Now on these, you'll notice there's a little O-ring in there. The O-ring comes to the outer side of it. You can see that in there. The pump looks alright. On these transmissions, quite often this little valve here gets worn or stuck, and they're a flow valve. Quite often these valves wear out, and one of the symptoms you'll get, if it's either leaking on that O-ring there or the valve is worn, is you've got no drive in reverse or drive. So you can get we usually replace these with a Sonax valve if they look a little bit worn or anything like that. But sometimes if they either get stuck on or stuck off, or they're leaking, and you'll go to select your gears and there's nothing there. You've got to actually rev it a little bit before you get enough flow to either free up that valve to get the movement. Okay, we're up to the coast clutch where the overdrive band runs on, and you can see it's already pretty dark. We'll just already loosen the band there, and you'll also have to loosen your speed sensors that are on the outside of the transmission, or take them out, or you can damage them getting them out and getting these drums out, because they actually poke through the case a little bit. Now I've loosened the band right off, and I'll just show you something here. I believe some people probably get mixed up with these struts. And you can see that one, see how it's got that's the one up against the servo piston. You can see it's got like a little cut off there, so it can actually work its way around. So you just have to remember that the servo piston one, the cut off is facing towards the pan, and this other one is the one that people get mixed up the most, put them in the wrong way. Tight fit is this one. It looks like it's the same on both sides, but the way you identify it, you'll find that when it's applied, that one just sits on the anchor bolt or the adjustment bolt. You'll see that little half round hole is actually bigger on one side than on the other one, if you notice that. And you always want to put the bigger one towards the pan, and that'll allow that to move a little bit more on that anchor bolt there. If you put it in the wrong way, the other way, it can't move freely enough, and you'll probably end up either breaking your band or prematurely wearing out your band. These are the little thrust washers. Now our end float on this is pretty good, but you can get selective thrust washers if something's worn in there to just adjust the end float. If you're adjusting the end float, you don't put your O-ring on there, so you don't have to muck around pulling it off like I did before, and just test it till you find the correct end float. And that's why it's always a good idea to do a reference test before you even pull it out or apart. That way you've just got one less measurement to do at the end of the rebuild or repair. Band, you can see we've got metal to metal. Band's buggered. You can see it's chewed right into that drum as well. Pop that circlip out. Sometimes when they burn like that, they won't come out very easily. Sometimes you have to give it a good whack on a hard solid surface for it to come out. And another thing is, it's always good to wear gloves when you're doing this sort of work. I'm not wearing gloves because I'm grabbing the camera a lot of times. One other thing I forgot to mention. On these double-sided, you've got single-sided clutches, which one will have like the lining on one side, the inner teeth on the inside, then there'll be lining on the other one with the teeth on the outside. These are double-sided ones, but they are actually directional. You'll see these little grooves here, they have to be facing that way. If you put them in that way, they'll be going the other way, and I think it doesn't sling out the oil as effectively. Now these have a little gear that drives the sun gear in the overdrive planetary, and if quite often these things wear out. So if you need to get one of these, just bear in mind that the earlier ones have got a slightly wider tooth, so you've got to make sure you get the right one. And you can see these ones, they've actually made it sort of go on a bit of an angle. And the idea for that is so the contact point has got slightly more surface area. If it was just straight, straight coming out, there'd be a tiny bit less there. So that's why they've made it on a bit of an angle. So more surface area, it should last a little bit longer. So we've got that little sun gear that is driven by that. I forget what the name of it is. Yeah, like that. And then you have your planetary there. But the problem is you need to take that servo that's applying that band out, otherwise you can't get that out as easily. It will come out. There we go. And quite often on these little thrust washers on the end of the gears wear out, so you want to check all of them that they're there. And now we've got the annulus. You'll see there's a little Torrington bearing or needle roller bearing in there, and there's also a Sprague clutch, which is a one-way clutch. Another Torrington bearing. And now, like I mentioned earlier, you need to take that little bolt out under the valve body to be able to get that out, and there's also a circlip there. Screwdriver with a little bend on the end of it. And you just have to work it slowly. You don't want to bend that circlip if you don't have to. Alright. And you'll notice that they're a tapered circlip, so you want to always have the flat bit up against what you're pushing, and the tapered bit actually wedges into the groove in the case. So just be aware of that. Little T30. I'll just pop these servo pistons out. And we've got one of these big clamps, you can just press it in. Pair of pliers like that. It's got the little ends cut off. Sometimes you need to rotate that circlip around a little bit. There's one there. Get your oil tray ready. And it's a common thing for the case to be worn out where these little shafts run through the case. You can re-sleeve them or put little bushes in there if they're too far gone. While I've got the clamp, I'll just whiz off that other one as well. Now, because I'm not pushing in the middle of it, you've got to give it a little bit of a tap just to help that cover just pop in a little bit, just so you can grab that circlip a bit easier. And there's the bigger one. See that? And now we can just work that center support out. They are precision fitted, so you got to pull it out nice and evenly, or it won't. It just gets stuck. It's cocked to one side, it's stuck. And another thing that happens sometimes on the groove where that circlip sits, it develops a little burr. So you've got to sort of get it past that burr as well. There we go. There it is. Center support. The rings run on here, and you've also got a Torrington bearing, but it sits on the outside, and you have sealing rings here as well. You can see that one of the sealing rings there, and another one sits underneath that, or at the bottom end of that bearing. And now we're up to the direct drum and the intermediate band around the direct drum or direct clutch. I've loosened the little adjuster, and again I will show you those little band struts. Because it's in deep, it's a little bit awkward to pull the struts out. I'll just drop in there. There's the intermediate band. We check the tips, make sure they're not worn. This is a full rebuild anyway, so we're going to replace the whole lot. I'll just pull that drum out as well, and then I can get to the struts. There's that drum, and you can see that one's nice and smooth. Now again, you've got the strut that's over where the adjuster is, and you'll see that that one's the same as the overdrive one. There's a bigger cutout hole, and that faces towards the pan, the bottom of the transmission. If you put it around the other way, then that can't sort of move around enough when it's applying the band. And the other side as well, you can see it's got the cutout. So the cutout goes towards the bottom or closer to the case. You've got to always make a note of where these thrust washers go and Torrington bearings and that sort of thing. So we'll just pop these out and just have a quick look. And they don't look too bad either. And also, like I mentioned earlier with that other clutch, if it's got the double-sided clutches on it, they are directional, so they need to be going in that direction there. Now we've got the forward clutch, which is this one. We've got this little hub there. Quite often this little bush, that's not pressed in there. They just sit there like that. They wear out. They need replacing. Torrington bearing. Got the little planetary. That's the rear planetary. And like the overdrive planetary, you want to check that these thrust washers are on both sides of the gears. There's not too much play there, and that one hasn't worn out. Quite often you'll find that just there's one completely missing, it's worn out. And then you've got this little bell with the sun thingy. Goes over the top of all that. Little spacer. Can't muck that up. Now in here we've got another little planetary, and you've got the hub where the low and reverse band runs on. So you need to pop out that circlip. I'm going to level up the transmission so the output shaft doesn't fall out when I get the circlip out. There's a circlip, and then basically all of that will come out. There it is there. Another little Torrington runs on that. And under there, there'll be another little circlip that's holding the output shaft. If you just push the output shaft this way, the circlip won't be as tight in that groove, and you can just get it, pop it out easier. And that's the circlip there, and you'll need these round ends on it. Get it off. Now you'll have that other annulus will come out, or the gear with the teeth on the outside that runs on the gear. And you'll have the hub, or the drum, that the low and reverse band runs on, and that one has a sprag clutch on it. You can see the sprag clutch in there. That's a one-way clutch, so you'll notice if you try and spin it one way it won't go, but it will spin the other way. And the low and reverse band, like that. Now we can slide out the output shaft. There'll be another little thrust washer there. You can see that one, like new, hasn't worn. And there's a little pickup sender. It spins around, and your little output speed sensor picks up the pulse as that rotates around like that. And that's basically it. Everything's out. I haven't popped out that piston there. You can just give it a soft tap from the inside and that'll pop out. And like I mentioned with the other one, you want to just confirm that the bore in the case isn't worn. Otherwise you've got to re-sleeve or re-bush the case there. There's a little output speed sensor there. We'll just let that drain out, and then we can start rebuilding it. Make sure you check all the bushings, all the sealing rings. There's a couple of sprag clutches in there, one-way clutches. You want to make sure that it hasn't damaged anything on the hubs. We'll replace them. Definitely we need to get a new coast clutch, or the first one that we pulled out, the band really chewed into it. But apart from that, it doesn't look too bad. And also another thing, you need to flush the cooler out with liquid. You can't just blow it out, because the air won't push out all that fine metallic debris. So you've got to actually have a fluid flush of some sort, whether you use transmission oil or if you use solvent. But you need to do that a few times to make sure it's clean, or ideally replace it completely, especially when there's so much metal in there. What else have we got? Low reverse servo, I'll just show you that. The low and reverse servo, just be aware there's a very big spring in it. It's not real strong, but it's strong enough to just fling out and maybe do some damage to your eye or anything. But you'll notice here, there are these little notch marks in a couple of spots, and there's an arrow up here on it. And what you're supposed to do, you'll see that there's little slots there. Just, if you're aware of it, just press it down like this and give it a twist to the left while supporting it, and there it is. And you've got a piston in there that needs replacing. So when you're putting it back in, you push it in. I think ideally you want to have that arrow matching up with these little slots on the side there. Someone's just put it in, probably in the wrong spot. So just be aware of that. You don't want that flying off and hitting you in the face or in the eye or somewhere like that. Anyway, I hope all that helps. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Any comments or suggestions, leave them in the section below. And throw us a beer if any of this information helps. Thank you for watching.